Hello, we're here today at 𝐻𝐸𝐴𝐶𝐸Rate in Vienna, Austria, and we're talking today about the future of the automobile industry. And I have here with me today one of our guests, Anna Bernstein, whose name I probably just mispronounced, who works for Mobility Ventures, a venture capital firm that invests, I guess, in a set of technologies. And she's a very interesting person. We had dinner last night, and I learned a little bit about where she came from, what she does. She's a PhD in biochemistry, which is probably unusual. And so my first question to you is, can you tell us a little bit about where you grew up, what you studied, and how you ended up getting a PhD?
Yeah, well, I grew up both in Israel and in the US, and my father worked for the Israeli aircraft industry, and so we were there for a while. As a child, I learned to love to learn. I loved learning new things. I loved knowledge. I read a lot. And at high school, I majored in physics. But then I went to the university and studied biology and physics and chemistry, and after to get to a PhD in biochemistry. I also taught chemistry at the university. And
where did you go to school? Where did you get your PhD?
In Tel Aviv University.
Tel Aviv.
In Tel Aviv, yeah. All my degrees were in Tel Aviv University.
Okay.
I loved my PhD. I loved working in the lab, but something was missing for me. And then I realized what it was. During my PhD, what I did was focus on the micro aspects, the macro. And for me, I was always driven by doing macro things that will impact. I did it through volunteering, and I was heading one of those NGOs in Israel. So the biochemistry gave me, again, taught me how to learn, how to ask questions, how to research. And it's good tools for life. But I wanted to take it to something impactful. And that's when I joined the government through a special program that takes PhDs and incorporates them next to high-level decision makers in the government in order to promote a policy that is based on that is based on data, that is based on knowledge, that is based on research. That was the aim of the program. Yeah. That's where I started my career at the government.
Very, very interesting. I started my career in engineering. I couldn't do it because I wasn't any good at it. It was terrible. And I remember in every engineering class, there was one woman. And she always sat in the back of the room and never said anything. And this was back in the late 60s, and the world changed a lot. But if you did your PhD in a difficult area, you didn't do it in art history, which is, I'm not saying it's not more difficult. This is a technical field. Was this already relatively open to women and easy, or did you find yourself in a man's world?
It's funny you ask, because I did find myself in a man's world. And after that, when I joined the government and I worked in the automotive space, it was mostly at first a man's world.
Right.
But, we just celebrated Women's Day a couple of days ago. Right. But I never felt that I was different than the rest. I never felt, and also the whole crowd and my whole team and colleagues never made me feel that I was a woman, that I'm different because I'm a woman. No, it never came up in that sense. I think it was more of the connections that were based on, of course, collaborations and friendships are the important things, and not necessarily if it's a man or a woman that's working on promoting those impactful things.
it's refreshing to hear you say that, because we hear so much today about women complaining about the man's world, that they're not treated fairly. And, in my career in academia, I had 22 PhD students, and 7 of them were women.
Mm-hmm.
And I always treated them just the same way, had same expectations, and I never had any difficulty. They did great work, and I was always wondering, why are these other people complaining? It was like, almost like it was something that was made up. And so I was interested in your thoughts on this. So let me switch and ask sort of a question. What is Israel's role in the auto industry? You never hear about it, so I don't even know, but that they must be involved somewhere in this. I don't know.
I think today it's quite known that Israel is like the Silicon Valley of the auto tech industry. At least that's what it's referred to in the big institutions. Israel has no automotive background other than this long ago car called Susita that was manufactured in Israel, but that was it. Israel had no auto-related business industry. But what we did have are competences, researchers, engineers, the innovation. Yeah. And once we realized, and that was, again, my role in the government, I was a deputy director of the Prime Minister's office, responsible for the national program for promoting Israel as a smart mobility hub, mm-hmm. promoting innovation, an innovation ecosystem in auto tech.
What year was this?
2011.
Okay, so 10, 15 years ago.
Exactly. Yeah. And in 2011, in Israel, there was Mobileye and Waze. Mobileye was its initial day, and Waze, but that was it. But the government saw that there's, again, the competences that are needed in order to create an innovation. And why? Because Israel always considered technology and innovation as a growth engine. Yeah. And specifically in that sector, and also in cybersecurity. Yeah. So that's why there were 2 national programs. One was the Smart Mobility Initiative, and one was the cybersecurity. I had the honor to actually initiate this whole Smart Mobility program, national program, and also lead it for 10 years, from the beginning, it was a 10-year program with KPIs to turn Israel into an ecosystem, to grow a startup industry, to bring multinationals to be active in Israel, to encourage investments to the Israeli startups. And that's what we created, a whole ecosystem. And today, Israel has about 700 startups spanning different subsectors or domains of what we call the auto tech industry.
Yeah. Is Israel still the startup nation?
Yes, it is.
It still is.
It still is. And I think even during the last year and a half, ever since there was the local war, I think one of the strengths of Israel that continued was the fact that Israel has the innovation, that we have to have that. As I said, it's our growth engine. We don't have other things. We have the innovation, we have the technology, and therefore it's remaining to be a startup nation. There's a lot of culture to make it that way.
No, I know this, and there's this very close relationship with the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
tech community. When we're starting this institute, we had this discussion with one of the ambassadors from Israel, I think, to Austria, and we were talking about this, and he said, well, when we want technology or we need collaboration, we go to the U.S. And he says, we don't go to Vienna.
Yes, but I must say, at least in the auto tech, we promoted a lot of collaboration with Europe. a lot, both on the government level, but also on the industry level. I mean, we had a lot of binational programs to promote projects. We had one with Germany to promote electric mobility. For instance, we had one with the UK to promote the whole autonomous mobility sector. So there was a lot of collaboration, again, both on the government, but also on the corporate industry level.
Interesting. Coming from the US and, growing up in the 60s, this was the peak of the automobile culture in the world. What American youth did in the 60s, they either took their parents' car or they already bought a fancy racing type car, filled it up with $5 worth of gas, and spent all of Saturday night driving around town, going to drive-ins. It was like unbelievable. It was unbelievable. And, and the auto industry at that time was dominated by 3 US companies. The Japanese really hadn't made any inroads into the US. And there were the main European companies, especially Mercedes and BMW, but even their presence was not that great. The US was sort of on the top of the automobile world. I fast forward, and the other day I tried to see, can I get an overview of the global auto industry? And I picked up 2 things that were very interesting. One is we make about 80 million cars a year. China makes about 40% of them. Mm-hmm. It's in a, that's one, right? And then the second one was, it's no longer the world that I grew up in. This is really a world of electrical technology, software. As Elon Musk said, the automobile today is closer to the computer and the aircraft industry than it was to the auto industry. Mm-hmm. And so someone that's, right, you're in this mobility space and you're working as an investor, right, your job is to figure out where to allocate resources to get the greatest return to investors, which I understand. And can you, in a sort of a very nutshell, tell us where the auto industry is and either where it's going or what, but just sort of in a layman's way, what's really going on?
First, you mentioned the US, and it's fun because the US was one of the first countries to say, okay, we're owning a vehicle, owning a brand, and driving it on a Saturday. That's a status. Saying that's a status. And the other thing is, the U.S. cities, if you look at them, they were built around the cars. Right. There's big roads, huge roads, everything. It's so hard to walk. It's not like in Europe where you walk from one place to another. That thing is changing now. Right. It's beginning to change. And we see it in different areas that people are now less interested in a vehicle, in owning an asset. They're more interested in going from point A to point B in the most effective way. Yeah. And it's not necessarily a vehicle. So what people are demanding today is mobility services, not owning a car. And if that's happening, then the brand of the cars are less relevant. And if you do want to buy a car or you want to own a car, then why do I need to pay to the expensive vehicles that offer me a certain limitation. It's just like more of engineering. And maybe I should get the Chinese vehicles, which promise me a world of, like Elon Musk said, a computer on wheels. So we're going in a couple of directions, both in the innovation and the global trends that the young people now today, they especially I think in Europe and also in the Far East, they don't care about owning a car anymore. We see the drop in even getting a driver's license or owning a vehicle. They're more interested in, in their TikTok and YouTube and all of the media. They just want to get from one place to another.
Yeah.
And I would even take it that owning a car these days for that generation, for the next generation, it's not even as sexy as it is.
I thought about this a lot. Why young people aren't interested in cars. Because, I grew up in this world where the car wasn't everything, but if you didn't have a car and a nice car, you just weren't with it.
Mm-hmm.
And I grew up in an era where you could enjoy your car.
Yeah.
The roads were relatively free. Parking wasn't that big an issue. The cars were sort of interesting. And, by the time my children grew up, having a car was more of a headache than an asset. The roads were terrible, traffic everywhere, you couldn't park. It wasn't fun.
It's a frustration.
It's a frustration.
And it's, yeah.
Yeah, it's a frustration. And of course, the problem is in the US, you have much less options, so you need a car, and so you're even more frustrated, where in Europe, it's much easier to live without a car.
Mm-hmm. But also in the US, we're seeing now like a movement towards what both the shared mobility, but also other modes of mobility. So again, we know that there's the renting and the leasing, but maybe also do it on a shorter term, like subscription. And then when I subscribe to a vehicle like I do to Netflix or YouTube, then I get all the bundled services, the insurance and the maintenance and everything. And I can take this car for a month or 3. And if I don't like it, maybe I could now change it to another car. And that thing makes owning an electric vehicle, which is for a lot of people a little scary, how they're going to handle it, so they don't go running to buy an electric vehicle. But now through those subscription or trying periods, it's easier because then they say, okay, we'll take it for 3 months and we'll see.
Yeah.
And that's why we also see like an increase in the electric vehicles. But again, the Chinese have taken it a step. They realize that, and that's why they're starting to produce a lot of electric vehicles and taking that share of the market.
So you have a technical degree, so I'm going to ask you a technical question that I find hard to get my head around. Hydrogen.
Okay.
Right?
I like hydrogen.
Is there any truth to this? Is this all hocus pocus? Or is this part of the future, or we're not even sure?
If you asked me this 5 years ago, I would have said
no.
Yes.
Oh, you
no,
would have said yeah.
Because I was really pro-hydrogen. I was both in Germany and Japan.
Yeah.
I took a hydrogen car and drove it and fueled it. And so, you see it happening, and hydrogen is the best way to store energy, unlike a battery. And the fueling of the car, it's like fueling a regular gasoline. You don't have to charge it for hours like with an electric mobility. And I thought it would take it would quickly incorporate into the market, especially with Japan's plan to focus on hydrogen vehicles, and also for Germany, that had already the infrastructure for it, and that already had the infrastructure for it, and so I thought it would take a pace. But 5 years later, and there's a lot of cautiousness around it, and one of the major things that will need to facilitate that is regulation and government and heavy infrastructure. And I think that once the government realized that, they took a step back. You don't see a lot of government funding today on hydrogen infrastructure, like they did 5 years ago when they initiated that. Without government support here, it's going to be hard.
Why have the governments not engaged this?
In the hydrogen? Because they always look at the alternatives. We have hydrogen, we need huge infrastructure for that. We have electric mobility. We also need infrastructure for that.
So it's a trade-off?
It's but in the electric mobility part, we see that again. You see Musk with the fast charging, the supercharging, and you see new methods of transferring energy without charging. So there's a lot of innovation in that space, whereas in the hydrogen you see less. So looking forward, it's from a government perspective. I'm going back to my government days. If I had to bet, I would bet on the electric mobility, but still I think that on the research level, we should not neglect the hydrogen field. And today I'm part of the National Energy Storage Institute in Israel. I'm on the board of that. And I still strongly believe that the hydrogen will be will have more of a market in the future. But it's still in its R&D stage. We don't see a lot of mature innovation there.
Is the size of the investment needed, either for charging stations or for hydrogen, similar, or are there huge differences?
I'll give you an example. Today, one of the companies that we invest in is a company that does patches that you put either on the road or, for instance, in warehouses or in closed compounds, and it transfers the energy to the vehicle running on it while it's in motion. So suddenly you don't need the heavy infrastructure of the charging station. All you need is the patches. So that minimizes the cost of the infrastructure that is needed for charging vehicles. And then you also have like robots. You don't need one charging station per car.
Right.
You have one robot running around and charging 10 vehicles.
Inventing the future is such an interesting subject, because we don't know what to disinvest from. We're not quite sure what to invest in, and we don't know what will be invented. It's like the ultimate dilemma for society.
You say society, and I'll tell you I'll let you in on a little fear of mine. There's a lot of innovation, and people are speaking about autonomous vehicles and the shared mobility and drones delivering food directly to your window, not even to your door, and the future cities. And when you look at pictures of how a future city looks like, it scares me. It seems clean. There seems to be no vehicles, which is nice, in perspective of smart mobility and clean air and everything. But it seems quite isolated. I mean, if I don't have to go outside to do my errands, but I get this drone delivering my groceries to me, or an autonomous vehicle taking my kids to their friends or whatever, or maybe now I don't have to go to work because everything is digitalized and I could stay at home, or maybe even my kids won't have to go to school because where is the community in all that? I mean, we're so much focused on innovation and technology, and we kind of forget the main part of the puzzle, which are the humans.
Humans. How do we as humans interact and survive with technology that is completely impersonal and in some sense alienating?
Yeah.
Even though, Americans were in love with their cars, but they were in love with their cars because it was part of the human experience with other people.
Exactly.
And I wonder how we deal with that. Is China a threat to the global or European auto industry? We read so much about this.
Yes. We see, look at Germany. Germany economy is based on the automobile industry. We see now a lot of their factories, some of their factories closing down. Wolfsburg, which is a town that was created for the Volkswagen Group,
right,
and employs most of the people there, are letting people go.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons for that is that the Chinese are bidding on the market share of vehicles globally, but also in Europe. And those companies are struggling now to understand how do they survive? How do they stay relevant in their market, but also to expand to other markets? And I think that there is now an understanding of the OEMs, both in Europe and also in the US, that they need to make a drastic change and take it from an asset-based industry to a service-based industry. Mm-hmm. I was giving this lecture in the US during the summer. I called it Dinosaurs on the Cliff. Dinosaurs being those automotive players, the cliff being what we call mobility as a service.
The cliff?
The cliff. Dinosaurs on the cliff. Imagine a dinosaurs.
Got it, okay.
Standing on the cliff, and what do they do now? What do we do now? And they understand that they have to cross the cliff because otherwise they won't stay relevant. Again, the cliff is what we call mobility as a service, going from assets to services. How do they do that? They have a lot of understanding that something has to be done. We see it by them opening different R&D centers, innovation departments. We see some of them launching their VCs. So they are investing, they are looking for solutions because they understand they need to change. The hard part for them is how to take the innovation that they invested in and deploy it inside. Because they don't have, again, on a higher level, they don't have the mindset for it. They're engineers, and they engineer their way. They do it step by step. And in a mechanical world, that's what they do. In a digital world where everything is going so fast, it's hard for them to keep the pace. And therefore, once even they realized that they need to incorporate innovation, and even if they find the right solutions, they still struggle to how to actually deploy it in their DNA, in their internal organization.
So, this reminds me of a very interesting problem in economics. And there was this famous question raised in the 1930s by a man named Ronald Coase, who said, why are there firms? Right? And it was an interesting question because in economic theory, there was no theory of firms. There was theory of markets. And he came up with this very, very simple insight called transactions cost. And he said, it's expensive to use the market. It's cheaper to use an organization. because you have all the information in the institute, right? And this was a very interesting insight. And then another great question emerged out of that is, why do we need more than one firm? Right? And then the answer was for competition, right? Otherwise we have a monopoly and we need more than one firm. So, if I look at a country like the US, there are like 5 million firms with employees, right? Europe probably has the same amount. And there's still one more question in economics that is just very relevant, to which we don't really have the answer. Why do you need new firms? Right? And it's a great question because we know that we create new firms, right? And we know that the new firms are the ones that a lot of times bring the innovation, bring the new ideas. And, right, so then the question is, can you bring new technologies to market in existing firms? And that's a question that I can see you've thought about this, and there's a whole set of reasons that argue that it's very difficult to do.
Because the firm has its DNA, and DNA is very hard to change.
That's it. Well, Anna, thank you very much for a most interesting and stimulating conversation.
Thank you very much.